Her voice cut through the restaurant like a siren. "This man shouldn't be serving food to anyone in my neighborhood. Fire him now!" The lobby went silent. My manager's face twisted with embarrassment as customers stared. Karen, the self-crowned president of our HOA, smiled like she'd just crushed a bug under her heel. Within minutes, I was stripped of my uniform, sent out the door in humiliation, all because she wanted to teach me a lesson. What Karen didn't know was that I wasn't just an employee. I owned every McDonald's in this district. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. People see a McDonald's uniform and think they know your whole story. They think you're stuck, disposable, replaceable. What they don't see is the history stitched into that visor. For me, those golden arches aren't just a logo. They're my family crest. My father immigrated to the United States with nothing but a suitcase, a work permit, and a heart stubborn enough to chase the American dream. He didn't know English well, didn't have connections, and had no safety net. What he did have was grit, and he poured that grit into a small McDonald's franchise he scraped enough loans together to buy. I grew up inside that restaurant. While other kids were at summer camps, I was sweeping floors, stacking ketchup boxes in the freezer, and wiping down booths until the vinyl shone. At the time, I hated it. I wanted to be outside with my friends, not scrubbing grease traps. But those hours became my education. My dad used to say, "Success isn't built in offices. It's built in kitchens no one wants to clean." By the time I was in high school, I knew every corner of that business. I could work the grill with my eyes closed. I could fix a broken ice cream machine faster than the repair guy. More importantly, I learned what it meant to serve people. Families came to us after little league games. Workers grabbed a meal after night shifts. Parents brought their kids for their first Happy Meal. McDonald's wasn't just food, it was community. When my dad passed away, the franchise rights came to me. I inherited not just one store, but the responsibility of protecting everything he'd built. Over time, I expanded, quietly, strategically. While working the counter to stay grounded, I bought more locations, negotiated better deals, built a district of franchises strong enough to provide jobs for hundreds of people. But I kept that truth hidden. I didn't want to live like a man on a pedestal. I wanted to live like everyone else. I wanted my kids to know humility, not privilege. So, when my wife and I bought our house in a subdivision run by a homeowners association, we didn't flash wealth. We didn't name drop businesses. We moved in as a regular family, dad, mom, 2 kids, and a dog who couldn't stop digging holes in the backyard. At first, the neighborhood looked perfect. White picket fences, kids riding scooters, barbecues on Saturdays. The kind of place where you wave at your neighbors and they wave back. But, like every perfect picture, there was a crack in the frame, and her name was Karen. Karen wasn't just the HOA president. She was the HOA, self-appointed, self-righteous. She had a smile that never reached her eyes, and a clipboard she carried like a sword. She fined families for grass growing too high, for leaving garbage cans out too long, for painting their shutters the wrong shade of beige. It wasn't about rules, it was about power. I tried to ignore it. I told myself, don't start fights you don't need to finish. That was my father's voice, reminding me to be patient, to rise above. For a while, I did. When Karen fined me for my kids' bikes leaning against the garage door, I paid it. When she sent the letter about my Christmas lights being too bright, I took them down. It burned, but I let it go. But the line was crossed the day she followed me to my workplace. The day she stormed into my McDonald's, screamed across the counter, and demanded my manager fire me in front of customers. She didn't see me as a neighbor, a husband, or a father. She saw me as someone she could humiliate. That was when everything changed. Because in that moment, Karen didn't just insult me. She insulted my father's legacy. She insulted the decades of sweat and sacrifice that built the arches I now stood under. She thought she had the power to break me. But the truth was, she had just woken a storm she couldn't control. And that's why I fight. Not for revenge, not even for pride. I fight because bullies like Karen thrive when good people stay quiet. I fight because my kids deserve a neighborhood where laughter isn't policed and families aren't fined into silence. I fight because the business my father built taught me one thing above all: community only survives when people stand up for it. Karen wanted me gone. She wanted me erased from my job, from my dignity, from my peace. But what she didn't realize was this: I had more at stake than she could ever imagine, and I had more power than she could ever dream. I used to think Karen was just a busybody, the type of neighbor who peeked through curtains and complained about leaf blowers. But it didn't take long to see her for what she truly was: a predator who hunted weakness. It always started small. The Johnsons, an elderly couple down the street, planted sunflowers by their mailbox. They loved those flowers. They reminded Mrs. Johnson of her childhood farm. A week later, Karen sent them a violation notice: unauthorized foliage, exceeds maximum height. She fined them $50. $50 might not sound like much, but for retirees on a fixed income, it stung. They trimmed the flowers down until they were stubs. The next week, Karen walked by, smiling as if she'd won. Then there was the Nguyen family. Their teenage son drove an old Honda Civic to school. It wasn't pretty, paint faded, muffler loud, but it was reliable. Karen decided it lowered property values. She had it towed in the middle of the night. When Mrs. Nguyen cried at the board meeting, Karen just folded her arms and said, "Rules are rules." She never went after the wealthy families. No, she was careful. She targeted the quiet ones, the people who didn't know the bylaws well enough to fight back. She knew who could afford lawyers and who couldn't. And she picked her victims like a surgeon picks veins: precise, deliberate, and cold. One of the creepiest things? She documented everything. She carried a leather-bound notebook filled with dates, addresses, and violations. I once saw her kneel in front of a house with a tape measure, calculating the exact length of grass blades. Another time, she photographed a child's chalk drawing on a driveway and later cited the parents for defacing property. Neighbors started whispering, "She's everywhere," they'd say. "She never sleeps." And it felt true. I'd see her car crawling through the neighborhood at dawn, headlights off, window cracked just enough for her camera phone. She treated our cul-de-sac like her kingdom, and the rest of us like trespassers. But Karen wasn't just nosy, she was strategic. She built alliances with two board members, Tom and Denise. Both of them had received favors. Tom's fence didn't meet code, but Karen let it slide. Denise once threw a loud party after midnight, no violation issued. In return, they voted with her every single time. 3 votes meant majority. 3 votes meant absolute control. She also weaponized fear. If you argued back, suddenly violations multiplied. Your trash can wasn't hidden enough. Your shutters were dirty. Your mailbox leaned an inch too far. It was death by 1,000 cuts. Most people gave in, paid the fines, and prayed she'd move on. But the scariest story? The Rodriguez family. They were new, young, with a baby just learning to walk. They built a small wooden playhouse in the backyard. Nothing fancy, just something for their daughter. Karen claimed it was an unauthorized structure. When they pushed back, she escalated. First, fines, then letters threatening legal action. Finally, this is the part that chilled us all, she called Child Protective Services, reporting unsafe conditions in their yard. It was a lie, but CPS still had to investigate. Imagine strangers inspecting your home because your neighbor wanted to punish you. The Rodriguez family almost sold their house just to escape her. That's when I realized Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was weaponizing the system to control people. She didn't care about lawns or property values. She cared about power. Watching families bend to her will gave her a thrill. And she loved attention. At HOA meetings, she'd strut in wearing bright blazers, slamming her binder on the table. She spoke in this syrupy, patronizing tone. "I'm only here to keep standards high. We don't want our neighborhood looking like a slum, do we?" Every time she said it, her eyes darted at whoever she was targeting that week. I started noticing a pattern. She'd pick someone vulnerable. She'd hit them with small, almost petty violations. If they resisted, she escalated. Fines, threats, intimidation. If they still fought back, she'd find something personal to exploit. A weakness, a secret. It wasn't random, it was calculated. She was testing people like a shark circling the water. Nipping first. waiting for blood. I told myself to stay invisible, blend in, keep my head down. After all, my family was my priority. I could survive a few fines if it kept the peace, but Karen noticed me. At first, it was the little things. A letter about my kids' bikes left on the lawn, a photo of my trash bin sitting 6 inches too close to the curb. Then came the fines for excessive holiday decorations. We'd hung a few extra strings of lights that year. My kids were excited for Christmas. Karen wasn't. I laughed it off, told my wife not to worry. But Karen wasn't laughing. She was circling, testing, waiting for the moment I'd push back. And the moment finally came when she stepped inside my world, the one place I thought was untouchable, the McDonald's my father built. When she got me fired, it wasn't just another violation. It was her declaration of war, and she had no idea she'd just crossed into enemy territory. The letter came on a Thursday. I found it stuffed halfway into my mailbox, the envelope thick, heavier than the usual violation slips Karen liked to drop. The return address was the HOA office, but I already knew whose fingerprints were all over it. Inside was a formal notice: unauthorized commercial activity conducted on property. I read it twice, then a third time. My stomach twisted. The accusation? That I was operating a food distribution business out of my garage. According to Karen, I was storing McDonald's supplies, grease, raw food, and industrial equipment in a residential neighborhood, endangering property values and health standards. It was a lie, a complete fabrication. My garage held nothing but bikes, tools, and a half-broken treadmill, but the tone of the letter was unmistakable, threatening. If I didn't cease operations immediately, the HOA would pursue legal action and possibly force foreclosure. My wife read it and went pale. She clutched the paper like it was a bomb that might go off in her hands. "She's coming after us," she whispered. That night, I found my daughter crying in her room. She'd overheard us talking. "Daddy," she said, "are we going to lose our house?" I knelt beside her bed, swore we weren't. But the truth? For the first time, I wasn't sure. The intimidation didn't stop at the letter. 2 days later, a city code inspector showed up at our door. Clipboard in hand, he said a complaint had been filed about illegal food storage. He asked to see the garage. I knew instantly who had called him. I led him out back, opened the door, and showed him the truth. Bicycles, paint cans, sports gear. Not a single French fry in sight. The inspector frowned, scribbled something, and apologized. We get calls like this sometimes, usually from neighbors. When he left, my wife's hands trembled as she locked the door. "She's trying to ruin us," she said. And she was right. Karen wasn't just playing HOA president anymore. She was dragging city officials into her personal vendetta. That's when the fear really set in. Every car that slowed in front of our house made my wife tense. Every stranger walking by sent our dog into a frenzy. At night, my son asked if Karen was going to make us move away. He was 8 years old, already learning what it meant to live under someone's thumb. And Karen knew it. The following week, she escalated again. A bright orange violation notice was taped to our front door, visible to every neighbor. The charge? Unkempt yard. Our lawn was freshly mowed, hedges trimmed. But that didn't matter. She wasn't citing reality. She was branding us, marking our family as troublemakers. Neighbors started avoiding eye contact. Some whispered when we passed. Karen had poisoned the well, making it look like we were the ones breaking the rules. The emotional toll was brutal. My wife lost sleep, pacing the living room at midnight, jumping at shadows. My daughter stopped playing outside. My son asked if he could ride his bike, somewhere Karen couldn't see him. It felt like our home had turned into a cage. And me? I felt the weight of my father's legacy pressing against my chest. This wasn't just about fines or letters anymore. This was about dignity, about protecting my family from a woman who had decided we were her enemy. Then came the scare that pushed us over the edge. One night, around 11, my wife shook me awake. "There's someone outside," she whispered. I crept to the window. A figure stood in the cul-de-sac, phone glowing faintly in the dark. At first, I thought it was just a kid, but then the light tilted, and I realized they were taking photos of our house. The next morning, Karen's latest letter arrived. This one included printed images, grainy, night-shot pictures of our trash bins, our porch light left on, even my car parked slightly crooked in the driveway. Each photo was captioned with violations. She wasn't just watching us, she was stalking us. I showed the packet to my wife, and she broke. Tears ran down her face as she said, "We can't live like this. She's going to destroy us." For the first time, I felt real fear, not just for our peace, but for our safety. What would Karen do next? Call CPS like she had. With the Rodriguezes? Push for foreclosure? Would she send police to our door with more false accusations? That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the pile of notices, the photographs, the threats. My father's words echoed in my head. Don't start fights you don't need to finish. But this wasn't about starting a fight anymore. Karen had already struck the first blow, and she had made it personal. I realized something as I sat there, fists clenched, heart pounding. She thought I was powerless because I wore a visor. She thought I was just another target she could intimidate into silence. What she didn't know was that behind that uniform was the man who owned her favorite drive-thru, her morning coffee stop, her kids' Happy Meal playground. I had power she couldn't see yet, and if she wanted war, I was ready to fight one. The knock came just after midnight. It wasn't the polite tap of a neighbor. It was the kind of pounding that rattles picture frames, that yanks you out of sleep with adrenaline already screaming in your veins. My wife sat up, eyes wide. "Who's at the door?" I grabbed a flashlight, my heart hammering. The pounding continued, 3 short, sharp slams. Then a voice. "Police! Open up!" I froze. Through the window, I saw 2 officers standing on our porch, their patrol car idling at the curb, with red and blue lights cutting across the siding of our house. I opened the door slowly. "Evening, officers," I said, voice tight. The taller one spoke first. "We received a call about a domestic disturbance." Neighbors reported yelling, "Possible violence." My wife stepped into the hallway, her face pale. "That's impossible," she said. "We were asleep." The shorter officer scanned the living room like he expected to find broken furniture or bruises. "Mind if we look around?" I knew my rights, but I also knew refusal would only raise suspicion. So I let them in. They checked the bedrooms, the kitchen, the garage. My kids woke up to strangers with badges shining flashlights into their rooms. My daughter clutched her teddy bear, trembling. My son whispered, "Daddy, are we in trouble?" When the officers finally finished, one of them sighed. "We didn't see anything, but we have to file the report. False calls like this happen, and I knew exactly who had made it. Karen." The next morning, she was outside watering her flowers, humming like nothing had happened. When she saw me, she smiled. Not the kind of smile you return, the kind that says checkmate. But here's what Karen didn't know. I had cameras. After the police left, I pulled the footage from my security system. The porch camera showed her car creeping down the street minutes before the call. And my doorbell mic, it caught her voice. She was on the phone, whispering into the receiver. "Yes, I hear shouting. I think it's violent. Please hurry." She'd staged the whole thing. The thought made my blood boil. Not just because she had lied, not just because she wasted police time, but because she weaponized law enforcement against my family. One wrong move, one confused gesture, and that night could have ended with handcuffs, or worse. And she'd done it with a smirk. The fallout was immediate. My wife barely slept the next night, jumping at every sound. My kids refused to stay in their own rooms. They curled up together on the couch, too afraid that someone would come for us again. Even our dog barked at shadows by the window. I tried to stay strong, but inside, the fear clawed at me. I kept replaying the flashing lights, the look on my daughter's face when she thought her parents might be arrested. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't about property values anymore. This was about control. Karen wanted to break us, to scare us into submission, to make us pack up and leave so she could hold her little empire uncontested. But she'd gone too far, and she'd left a trail. A few days later, the evidence grew stronger. One of my neighbors, Mr. Patel, approached me as I mowed the lawn. He looked nervous, glancing up and down the street before speaking. "I saw her," he whispered. I shut off the mower. "Saw who?" "Karen, The night the police came, I was walking my dog. She was parked 2 houses down, phone in her hand. When the patrol car showed up, she drove off. That made 2 pieces of evidence, the footage and a witness. And then came the clincher. Another neighbor, Denise, the same board member who usually sided with Karen, pulled me aside at the next HOA meeting. She leaned close, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't sign off on this," she said. "Karen filed the complaint under the board's name, but we never voted. She's acting alone now." Her eyes darted nervously. "I think she's losing it." That was the first crack in Karen's armor. Her allies were starting to question her. But even as I gathered proof, the intimidation didn't stop. A week later, I woke to find the word violator spray painted across my garage door in red. My kids saw it before I could cover it up. My son asked if Karen was going to take our house away. My wife broke down crying on the front lawn. That's when fear turned to fury. I looked at the vandalism, at my kids' terrified faces, at my wife's shaking hands, and I made a decision. No more waiting. No more hoping she'd stop. Karen had declared war, and now I had the evidence to end it. I gathered everything. The video footage of her call, the audio recording, Mr. Patel's testimony, the admission from Denise. Piece by piece, the picture came together. Karen had thought she was untouchable, hidden behind bylaws and fine print. But she hadn't counted on me documenting every move. She hadn't counted on neighbors brave enough to speak up. And she definitely hadn't counted on the man she tried to humiliate at McDonald's being the one person with the resources to fight back and win. The night the police knocked on my door was meant to break me. Instead, it became the turning point, the moment the victim stopped being afraid and started building the case. Because now, I had proof, and soon, the entire neighborhood would see it. Fear is paralyzing until it isn't. For weeks, Karen had chipped away at us. Letters, photos, city inspectors, police at midnight. She thought she was in control. But when I stood in front of my spray-painted garage, my kids staring at me like I couldn't protect them, something snapped. Fear burned off. Determination took its place. It was time to fight back. I started with the footage. My porch camera recorded everything. The slow crawl of Karen's SUV, the glow of her phone, her voice whispering into it. I replayed the clip a dozen times, listening carefully. She never said my name, but the words were clear. "I think it's violent. Please hurry." Next, I compared the video timestamp to the police report. The call was logged at exactly 12:07 a.m. My footage showed Karen in front of my house at 12:05, phone pressed to her ear. 2 minutes later, red and blue lights filled the frame. It was airtight. She wasn't a concerned neighbor, she was the caller, and I made sure to save copies, on a USB, on a cloud drive, even emailed to myself. Karen wasn't going to erase this. Then came the witness. I walked over to Mr. Patel's house one evening, thanked him for speaking up before, and asked if he'd be willing to put it in writing. At first he hesitated. Karen scared him too. But when I showed him the footage, his eyes widened. "I knew it," he whispered. "I'll write it down." That single page, signed and dated, turned into a weapon. It wasn't just my word against hers anymore. It was testimony. The next piece of the puzzle came from the inside. Denise, one of Karen's own allies. I caught her outside after another HOA meeting. She looked exhausted, like she was carrying a weight she didn't want anymore. "I didn't vote for this," she admitted. Karen files things under board action when no one else agreed. She's out of control. I asked if she'd be willing to say that out loud. She shook her head. "Not yet. But if this goes to court, I'll testify." It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Another crack in Karen's armor. Still, I wanted more, something undeniable. So I filed a records request with the city. It's simpler than it sounds. You just fill out a form, and the clerk gives you copies of complaints made against your address. A week later, the envelope arrived. Inside were 3 official reports. Unauthorized commercial activity, filed by Karen herself. Unkempt yard, filed by Karen with attached photos. Domestic disturbance, caller name redacted, but the phone number matched the one registered to Karen's address. It was like finding the missing pieces to a puzzle. Her signature was on the first 2 reports. The third had her number. Combined with the footage and testimony, it painted a perfect picture. Karen had fabricated complaints, escalated harassment, and lied to law enforcement. The evidence pile on my desk grew. Photos, letters, timestamps, witness statements. Each one was another nail in the coffin she built for herself. My wife watched me work night after night, her fear slowly turning into hope. "Do you really think this will stop her?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "but not just stop her. Expose her." And then something unexpected happened. Neighbors started coming forward. The Rodriguezes, the family she once targeted with CPS, heard what happened to us and shared their story. They still had the letter Karen sent, threatening legal action over their daughter's playhouse. The Johnsons dug out the fine they'd paid for their sunflowers. Even the Nguyens showed me the towing receipt from when Karen had their son's car hauled away. It was like everyone had been holding their breath, too scared to speak. But now that someone was standing up, they were ready to hand me their proof. I didn't just have a case, I had a coalition. With everything collected, I spoke to a lawyer. I didn't tell him about the franchises, not yet. I walked in wearing jeans and a plain shirt, just another father fed up with his HOA. When I laid the evidence on his desk, he leaned back, whistling low. "This isn't a civil dispute anymore. This is harassment, possibly fraud. And that false police call," he shook his head. "That's serious. She could face charges." Hearing it out loud was like a weight lifting off my chest. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. Karen really was breaking the law, and now I had the proof to bring her down. The final step was strategy. I could have gone straight to court, but I wanted the community to see the truth first, to strip away the power Karen held through fear and intimidation. So I planned it carefully. The next HOA meeting, in front of everyone. I pictured it in my mind. The packed clubhouse, Karen sitting smug at the front, binder in hand. She'd expect to control the room, like always, but this time I'd be ready. Not with anger, not with shouting, with proof. And when the neighbors saw the truth, when they realized they weren't alone in their suffering, Karen's empire would crumble. That night, as I tucked my kids into bed, my daughter asked, "Daddy, is the bad lady going to get in trouble?" I kissed her forehead and said, "Yes, sweetheart. This time, she is." Because the investigation was over, the case was airtight, and the showdown was about to begin. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed. Every folding chair filled, neighbors lining the walls, murmurs echoing against the low ceiling. People smelled blood in the water. At the front sat Karen, binder stacked high with violation slips, lips pressed into that smug little smirk she always wore when she thought she was untouchable. On either side of her, Tom and Denise, her so-called allies. But tonight, Denise wouldn't look at her. That crack I'd seen before had widened into something more. Karen banged her gavel against the table. "Let's begin. First order of business. Repeated violations by the..." She squinted at her notes. "Asan family." Gasps rippled through the room. My wife tensed beside me, her hand gripping mine under the table. My kids sat with a neighbor in the back, wide-eyed, watching their father walk into the storm. Karen's voice dripped with venom. "We've received numerous complaints. Unauthorized commercial activity, yard neglect, even a domestic disturbance. It's a pattern of behavior that lowers property values and threatens our community." She spread her hands dramatically, as if she were the hero in some courtroom drama. "Therefore, I propose a motion, immediate fines, and if unpaid, foreclosure proceedings." The room erupted, whispers, gasps, some claps from her loyalists. I stood slowly. My chair scraped the floor, the sound slicing through the noise like a blade. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "before you vote, I think everyone here deserves to see the full story." Karen narrowed her eyes. "This isn't your platform. You don't dictate." I raised a hand. "I won't take long, but you've made accusations. And I have proof." Hush fell. From my bag, I pulled a laptop, connected it to the projector. The screen lit up, and every head turned toward the wall. The first clip played, Karen's SUV rolling down the street at midnight, headlights off. My doorbell camera audio crackled. Yes, I hear shouting. I think it's violent. Please hurry. 2 minutes later, police lights flashed across the screen. Gasps. A woman in the back muttered, "That's her car." Karen's face went white, then red. She slammed her binder shut. "This is taken out of context. Anyone could have—" I cut her off. Next slide. The city complaint reports filled the screen, 3 documents side by side. 2 bore her signature. The third listed a phone number. I zoomed in. This number belongs to Karen Whitmore, HOA president. Same one that called the police to my door at midnight. Same one that told inspectors I was running a restaurant out of my garage. False. Every bit of it. Karen scrambled to her feet. "These are private records. He's twisting them." But then Mr. Patel stood. His voice shook, but he spoke clearly. "I saw you that night. On your phone, waiting for the police." More murmurs. Heads turned, a tide shifting. I wasn't done. "Let's hear from the Rodriguez family," I said. They rose, holding a copy of the CPS letter Karen had sent about their daughter's playhouse. She called child services on us, lied about unsafe conditions. "And us," said Mrs. Johnson, clutching her sunflower fine. "And us," added the Nguyens, waving the towing receipt. One by one, the people she had silenced now found their voices. The room filled with anger, not at me, but at her. Karen's composure cracked. She pounded the table. "These are lies! I'm protecting this community. Without me, this place would fall apart. I am this neighborhood." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, no one believed her. I leaned forward, calm, steady. "You're not protecting us. You're terrorizing us. And the proof is right here. The police report, the city documents, the witnesses, the video. You've crossed every line, legal and moral." Denise finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Karen, I can't do this anymore. You filed things under our names without permission. I won't cover for you again." That was it. The last pillar crumbled. The board called a vote. The motion wasn't about me anymore. It was about her. Hands raised one after another. A unanimous decision. Karen was removed as president effective immediately. Gasps turned into cheers. Some neighbors even clapped, a sound that echoed like victory. But it didn't end there. I handed the evidence packet to the police officer waiting in the back. Yes, I had called him ahead of time, let him know what would surface tonight. When he stepped forward, badge glinting in the fluorescent light, Karen's bravado evaporated. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "we'll need to ask you some questions. False reports to law enforcement are a serious offense." Her binder slipped from her hand. Papers scattered across the floor like the ashes of her reign. As she was let out, she hissed at me over her shoulder. "You'll regret this." But her words had no power anymore. Not with the truth out in the open. The meeting ended in a way no one expected. Neighbors hugging, whispering about freedom, relief washing over the room like a long overdue rain. And as I packed up my laptop, my wife slid her hand into mine. For the first time in months, she smiled. "You did it," she whispered. I shook my head. "We did it. All of us." Because this wasn't just my victory. It was the neighborhood's, and Karen's reign of fear had finally ended. The morning after Karen was removed, the neighborhood felt different, quieter, softer, safer. For months, every walk to the mailbox had felt like walking into enemy territory. Every rustle of paper behind the front door carried the weight of another violation, another attack. But that morning, when I opened the box, all I found was junk mail and a coupon flyer. No threats, no orange slips, no fear. My wife leaned against the doorway, coffee in hand, and smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. "It's over," she whispered. I nodded. "Yeah, it's finally over." But I didn't just want to feel the difference. I wanted to see it. That weekend, I gathered my kids in the front yard. Together, we dug a hole near the edge of the driveway. The soil was damp, dark, almost symbolic. My daughter held the sapling steady while my son shoveled dirt over its roots. A maple tree, something that would outlast all of us. When we finished, I wiped sweat from my brow and said, "This tree will grow taller every year, just like us." No one can cut it down without a fight. My son grinned. My daughter hugged me around the waist. My wife, tears in her eyes, took a picture. It wasn't just planting a tree, it was planting freedom. A declaration that this was our home and no one could take it from us again. The neighborhood changed too. Without Karen's iron grip, people started stepping out of their shells. The Johnsons replanted their sunflowers, brighter and taller than ever. The Rodriguezes rebuilt their daughter's playhouse, painting it pink with white trim. The Nguyen's son parked his Honda proudly in the driveway, no longer afraid of a tow truck in the night. And for the first time, laughter returned to our cul-de-sac. Kids rode bikes without parents nervously scanning for Karen's car. Neighbors waved without fear of being fined for the angle of their mailbox. It was as if the entire community had been holding its breath. And now, we were finally breathing again. The HOA didn't dissolve. We still needed rules. But new leadership rose from the ashes. Denise, once Karen's ally, stepped forward and admitted her mistakes. She apologized to the community, her voice cracking, and promised to rebuild trust. The board voted her interim president, but this time it wasn't a coronation. It was a decision made with open hands, not closed fists. Meetings changed too. They weren't battlefields anymore. They were conversations. People brought ideas, not complaints. We talked about fixing potholes, repainting the playground, organizing block parties. For the first time, it felt like a neighborhood, not a dictatorship. As for me, I went back to my McDonald's, this time not as an employee in a visor, but as the owner of the district. And here's the twist Karen never saw coming. The very same McDonald's where she got me fired was the one I signed paychecks for. I kept that secret until the right moment. After her removal, word spread. When neighbors realized the man she tried to humiliate was the one keeping the restaurants running, they didn't look at me with pity anymore. They looked at me with respect. But truth be told, I didn't fight Karen to prove who I was. I fought her to protect my family, to protect my father's legacy, and to remind myself of the lesson he'd always taught me. Community only survives when people stand up for it. One afternoon, weeks later, I repainted our mailbox. The spray-painted word, violator, had long since been scrubbed off, but I wanted to give it a new life. I painted it a bold, clean white, and on the side, I added a small decal of a golden arch, not as a brand, but as a symbol of resilience. Neighbors passing by nodded and smiled. One even said, "Looks like victory paint." And maybe it was. Life returned to normal, or at least a better version of it. My kids played outside again without fear. My wife hosted barbecues in the backyard, laughing with neighbors who had once been too scared to gather. Even the dog seemed calmer, wagging his tail as if he could sense the shift. Every time I passed that little maple tree, I felt the same thing: pride. Not just in winning, but in surviving. In standing tall against someone who thought she could break us. Karen was gone, her power stripped, her threats silenced. Some said she moved to another town. Others claimed she was facing legal trouble. I didn't care. She was out of our lives. That was enough. And that brings me to you, the one watching this story. If you've ever dealt with an HOA president who abused their power, if you've ever felt trapped in your own home, if you've ever been fined, threatened, or bullied into silence, know this: you're not alone. We stood up. We fought back. And we won. So if you've lived through something similar, or if you just love seeing bullies get what they deserve, hit that subscribe button. Share your own story in the comments. Because this channel isn't just about me. It's about all of us who refuse to let fear rule our homes. And together, we're stronger than any Karen with a clipboard.